Greetings, fellow pilgrims. Welcome to our 19th issue of Logosophia magazine, based on the true, the good, and the beautiful storytelling. This issue includes, but is not limited to, lots of thoughts on storytelling in books, a short biography of C.S. Lewis, and a brand new short story. Please enjoy and let us know what you think. Happy summer! Sarah Levesque, Editor-in-Chief.
The Nashville Divorce. In the beginning, God's creative hand shaped the cosmos, the seas, and the land. He spoke, and from nothing all things came to be, a divine artist setting beauty free. Made in His image, we too have this gift, to create, to express, our spirits to lift. Some painters with colors, some sculpt with their hands, while others make music that sweeps through the land. In Nashville's heart, where country music holds sway, Jesus and pickup trucks still rule the day. But beneath the surface, a story unfolds, and a misunderstanding untold. Imagine a family, let's call its head Silas, their harmony sweet like the psalmist Asaph's. In a small southern town, they sang hymns with grace. Their voices filled the church, a heavenly embrace. Then came the radio, a newfangled sensation, promising to spread music across the nation. Record men arrived with dollar signs in their eyes. Your songs can be heard neath all kinds of skies. Picture your music, they said with a grin, in every home, where the radio's din brings comfort and joy to folks far and wide. Your talent's too big for this small countryside. The family huddled, considered the choice to stay in their home or to give the world their voice. The promise of fame, of riches untold, was tempting indeed, a future of gold. Silas, wide-eyed, dreamed of the Grand Ole Opry stage. His family's name in lights, they'd be all the rage. From Johnson City to Nashville, then who knows where. Their melodies floating on the airwaves' air. But leaving wasn't easy. Their roots ran deep. The church was their home, their spiritual keep. Yet the pull of the road, that siren's sweet call, proved too alluring. They gave it their all. They packed up their instruments, said their goodbyes, tears in their eyes, but hopes in their sighs. The open road beckoned, a new life to start. Radio and concerts tugging at their heart. They traveled from town to town in their car, playing small gigs, dreaming of being stars. Radio stations welcomed them with open arms, their down-home sound full of musical charms. Money trickled in, more than they'd known before, but the cost of travel often left them poor. Hotel rooms and diners became their new home as they chased their dream, continuing to roam. The church back home watched with worried eyes, fearing the world might compromise the faith of this family they'd known so well. But couldn't they see? They had stories to tell. So picture this Silas, this hypothetical youth, torn between two worlds, searching for truth. In one hand his Bible, in the other a guitar, trying to balance faith near and far. This tale of Silas could be anyone's story, of families who left seeking musical glory. Radio's reach and promise of wealth drew many away from spiritual health. But was it all loss? Could there be a way to carry their faith as they went to play? Could the church have seen it as a mission field, where songs of praise and more could be revealed? Consider the Psalms, David's great songs, expressions of faith, of rights, and of wrongs. God used His talents to speak to our hearts, proving the power of faith and art's parts. In their zeal to protect from the world's sinful ways, the church overlooked art's power to praise, to reach seeking souls with melodies sweet, to share God's love on every city street. The road can be lonely, that much is true, especially back then with no cell phones to help them through. But imagine if churches had opened their doors, offering rest to these troubadours. Instead, suspicion grew over the years. Artists were seen as weird, fueling old fears. a divide that widened like Hatfields and McCoys, neither side hearing through the judgment and noise. But what if we saw things in a different light? Artists as heroes, shining God's light, their songs and their stories reaching far and wide, carrying faith's message on culture's tide. For God is creator, and we in his image are called to create, not hide our talent's visage. Whether painting or singing or shaping with hands, we're fulfilling our purpose, meeting divine demands. The church has a role to nurture and guide, to help artists navigate the world's changing tide, not to judge or condemn, but to seek to understand the unique calling of the artistic brand. For in every song, every stroke of the brush, there's potential in God's voice in the world's rush, to touch hearts and minds in ways blunt words often fail, to make God's love known and the beauty of his tale. So let's bridge this gap, this long-standing divide, recognizing the gifts on the other side, the church offering wisdom, artists their skill, together fulfilling what God's heart wills. From Nashville stages to far-flung lands, let's join our voices, our hearts, and our hands. For when faith and art walk in unity, we reflect God's image for all to see. In the end, it's about stewarding our gifts, using our talents as the Spirit lifts, whether from pulpit or center stage. We're all called to shine God's love every day. So let's embrace the artists, their God-given call, recognizing their value to one and all. For in their creations, be it song or art, we might just glimpse God.
Holy Heroes, C.S. Lewis, by Ian Wilson. Read by Joshua David Ling. When someone mentions fantasy writers, some of the names that come up may include J.R.R. Tolkien or Robert Jordan. But a name that should always come up, in my opinion, is C.S. Lewis. He was, without a doubt, one of the most brilliant writers of fantasy, philosophy, and Christian apologetics of the 20th century. Clive Staples Jack Lewis was born November 29, 1898, in Belfast, Northern Ireland. His parents were both well educated and put a great deal of value on reading, and reading well. Both Jack and his brother Warnie, were avid readers from a young age. Lewis was able to read at the age of 3, and by 5 he was already writing his own stories in the style of Beatrix Potter. After a rich home education, the Lewis boys were sent to various boarding schools in England, where they did not fit in at all. They were often bullied for their lack of physical prowess in sports and their often introverted, studious nature. The tragic death of their mother from cancer in 1908 had convinced Jack that God was cruel, and as an embittered teenager in 1912, he accepted atheism. 1914 found Jack adrift, without a mother, without God, without friends. He and Warnie were close, but they only saw each other on holidays. It was then that he met the Great Knock, the private tutor W.T. Kirkpatrick, who above all others influenced Lewis's life and way of thinking. In 1917, Lewis entered Oxford. However, his academic career was interrupted by his military service in the First World War. Lewis did his patriotic duty, serving bravely in France. The war had a profound influence on him, which one can find in his written works. He had seen much death and horror, but had also known companionship and courage. Lewis returned to Oxford in 1913, where he earned high honors. He adored Oxford, and it could be said that his heart always remained there. While there, he published some of his earliest poetry, and it was there in 1926 that he met a man who would be a great influence on his life and work, J.R.R. Tolkien. During the 1920s, Lewis discovered the writings of G.K. Chesterton and the fantasy tales of George MacDonald, both of which challenged his faith in materialism. At about the same time, he became closer acquaintances with Tolkien, Owen Barfield, and Dorothy L. Sayers, all of whom espoused a Christian worldview. After many hours spent in deep discussion, Lewis finally returned to the Christian faith in 1931. It was not long after that Lewis began his apologetic work. In 1933, he published his novel The Pilgrim's Regress, an allegory of the various artistic and philosophical movements of the 20th century. It was a defense in narrative form of the classical principles of Christianity and Romanticism against the encroaching ideas of modernity and materialism, as well as the vacuous nature of the church at the time. By the end of the 1930s, Lewis had published the first novel in his space trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet. He would later write 2 sequels, and the book remains a classic of the science fiction genre. Then, in 1940, Lewis wrote The Problem of Pain, in which he explored the question of how a good God could allow suffering. By 1941, Lewis had become something of an unwilling spokesman of Christianity, earning him a spot on the BBC discussing Christian doctrine and practice over the radio in a series of talks that he would eventually publish as the classic book Mere Christianity. Through the 40s, Lewis published several works, including The Screwtape Letters, The Abolition of Man, Perelandra, That Hideous Strength, and Miracles, all of which are worth reading for any thinking Christian. He was a popular man, receiving hundreds of letters from admirers which he dutifully answered. His literary work continued through the 1950s as he published his Chronicles of Narnia, undoubtedly his most popular books, beloved by young and old. Like all of Lewis's fiction, Narnia is both a great work of fiction as well as a theological treatise in narrative form. Lewis believed that fiction was catechetical in nature, and the stories we read have a formative effect on us, and that can be both positive and negative. Thus, he made it his mission to write good stories, stories that would lead people toward the light. Lewis's popularity as a writer actually led him to stumble into a marriage. Having been converted by Lewis's writings, American Joy Davidman decided to visit the great writer to thank him in person, and the two became rather close friends through their meeting and continued correspondence. Joy, however, was trapped in a loveless marriage and had 2 sons, Douglas and David. After her husband's unfaithfulness, the two divorced, freeing Joy to fall fully in love with Jack. The two became one in holy matrimony in 1956. Lewis was 59 years old at the time, 16 years older than Joy, but this caused no issues in their marriage. For a time, Lewis was blissfully happy. Through Joy's influence, Lewis wrote another book, Till We Have Faces, a retelling of the story of Cupid and Psyche. This book was written very much from the female viewpoint, which he could not have done without Joy, or their mutual friend Dorothy L. Sayers. Then the same disease that took his mother took Joy in 1960. While processing his grief over the loss of his wife, Lewis wrote A Grief Observed, which he published under a pseudonym in 1961. He joined Joy on her journey to the Lord's embrace the next year, leaving behind an incredible legacy in the form of his writings and addresses. I could say much, much more about the legacy of C.S. Lewis and what his work has done for me personally, but I suppose that would be a book in itself. I'll only conclude by saying that you should consider reading his books yourself.
Audience Wanted by Sarah Levesque. Isn't it interesting how everybody has a story to tell? Now, I don't mean that phenomenon where every young person wants to write a book, though that too is interesting. I mean the fact that by the end of the day, the vast majority of people can come home and have a new story to tell. You'll never believe what Thelma said to me. Guess what happened at lunch today? Remember that meeting I told you about? Wow. Today we took Rex to the vet and As humans, we are wired to share. Some of us, raising my hand, share more than others. And that's okay, provided we're not wearying our audience. Many cultures share more than just their daily adventures through stories. They share lessons, spiritual knowledge, and generations of history. Unfortunately, people in our Western culture often seem to believe that education must be gotten from books and certified educators, that things are not true unless they are read on a page or a screen, and that the stories of the past are boring. How many of us listen to our elders and their stories? How many youngsters of our technological era share time with grandparents and other beloved senior citizens and hear their tales? In addition, sadly, how many times do we shut the children down when they want to tell us about the frog they found, the swing they jumped off of, the bruise they got on their knee? It's so easy to say, I know I was there, or I'm busy right now, or we don't have time for this. After hearing these many times, they understandably stop sharing with the adults in their lives, be they old or young. Instead, the youth get their advice from their peers and the internet. Not only do we often ignore the troves of stories and wealth of experience that is our elders, but how often do we go out of our way to talk with the stranger in front of us at the grocery store, or the kid behind the coffee counter, the person in the seat next to us on the train? We lack that human connection, and we miss out on those stories. To add to all the stories we are missing from the people around us, how many of us are ignoring the plethora of literature in our local libraries? We don't make time to read. Perhaps we feel all read out from our years of schooling. Perhaps electronics are stealing our attention. Perhaps other things are a higher priority out of sheer necessity. All those second-hand experiences and lessons we could be garnering from those books go unlearned. Let's be the change we wish to see in the world. Build those human connections. Listen to the senior citizens, the children. Make an effort to strike up a conversation when you're waiting in line. Visit your local library, talk to the librarians, borrow real paper books and read them, and always share your stories with all.
Klein Book Worth Reading by Kathryn White. Read by Deborah Morgan. Previously published in the spring 2024 Prairie Dust Trail Magazine, Volume 2, Issue 2. I am a fantasy author. I used to avoid books that talked theology or anything nonfiction. I only read such books because I felt like I had to if I wanted to build my spiritual prowess. But here's the thing I learned. Taking a journey through Christian classics isn't just about flexing your intellectual muscles. It's like a pilgrimage that fills your heart with wisdom, challenges your thoughts, and sets your soul on fire for your relationship with Christ. These timeless treasures dive deep into the spiritual and theological, serving up insights that'll have you nodding in agreement or going, aha, that makes so much sense now. They're not just stories, they're handheld experiences from spiritual elders. Ever faced a head-scratcher of a situation and wished for some wise guidance? These classics got your back, offering biblical principles to navigate through those ethical mazes. These books spill the tea on the development of Christian thought, the struggles of influential figures, and the challenges faced by believers. Challenges that, let's face it, we still encounter today. What's so awesome is that these classics are like time-traveling buddies. They've weathered the ages, connecting us with fellow believers across cultures, generations, and denominations. You'll find yourself not just reading, but chatting with true kindred spirits from centuries past, getting the lowdown on God, life, and what it truly means to be on this Christian journey. They challenge your assumptions, ignite devotion, and help you see the Bible in a fresh light. It's not just about reading. It's about emerging with a faith that's more robust, more unshakable, and feeling like you've made a friend in the process. But wait, there's more. Beyond being spiritual guides, many of these books are literary wonders. Think of them as a feast for your mind and your heart. Authors like Augustine, Dante, and Chesterton aren't just dropping truth bombs. They're doing it with style, making the whole experience not just smart, but downright delightful. Whether you're a seasoned believer or just dipping your toes into the waters of faith, these 12 gems I've listed below are like treasure chests of wisdom. They've left their mark on Christian literature, and guess what? They're ready to leave their mark on you. So let's dive in and let the adventure begin. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. A classic work of Christian apologetics, Lewis eloquently explores and defends the core beliefs of Christianity. Drawing on logic and reason, he provides a compelling case for the Christian faith. Honestly, any book written by C.S. Lewis is worth the read. The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. Written in the 17th century, this allegorical novel is a Christian classic that tells the story of Christian's journey from the city of destruction to the celestial city. It remains one of the most widely read books in English literature. While the Old English is very hard to understand, there are many good updated versions with modern English. The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. A devotional classic, this work offers spiritual counsel and guidance for Christian living. Written in the 15th century, it provides timeless reflections on the pursuit of holiness and a deeper relationship with God. Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. In this intellectual and philosophical masterpiece, Chesterton presents a defense of Christian orthodoxy. His wit and keen observations make this work both profound and enjoyable for readers. The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Written by the German theologian and pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, this book explores the meaning of discipleship and the cost of following Christ. It challenges readers to live out their faith in a radical and committed way. The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. A memoir of faith and courage, Corrie ten Boom recounts her experiences during the Holocaust and how her Christian faith sustained her in the face of unimaginable challenges. This powerful story inspires readers with the strength of faith in the darkest of times. Make sure to have tissues nearby. Confessions by Augustine of Hippo. Written in the 4th century, Augustine's Confessions is an autobiographical work that explores his spiritual journey, conversion to Christianity, and reflections on God's grace. It is considered one of the earliest Christian memoirs. The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. A timeless spiritual classic, this book shares the wisdom of Brother Lawrence, a 17th century Carmelite monk. Through a series of letters and conversations, Brother Lawrence imparts insights on living in continual awareness of God's presence. The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. While not exclusively a Christian theological work, Dante's The Divine Comedy is a monumental, epic poem that explores themes of sin, redemption, and the afterlife. It is considered one of the greatest works of world literature. Fox's Books of Martyrs by John Fox. A historical account of Christian martyrs throughout history, this book was first published in the 16th century. It provides a detailed narrative of the lives and deaths of individuals who faced persecution for their Christian faith. Pilgrim's Inn by Elizabeth Goudge. Part of Goudge's Eliot Family trilogy, Pilgrim's Inn is a Christian novel that weaves together themes of faith, redemption, and community. Goudge's storytelling captures the transformative power of faith in everyday life. The Pursuit of God by A.W. Tozer. A.W. Tozer's classic work explores the idea of seeking a deeper relationship with God. With profound insights and a call to intimacy with the divine, The Pursuit of God remains a beloved resource for spiritual seekers.
In Favor of Fantasy by Amanda Pizzolatto. In this day and age, when fantasy and science fiction have garnered such a following among many fans, there comes a group of people who decry it. They ask, why do you like this junk? What's so good about it? Read something real or a classic. Well, let's just say there's a problem with that last line. See, if you look, many classics are science fiction and or fantasy, especially fantasy. Science fiction is actually a more recent addition to the list of genres, but even so, it too has a basis in a classic, namely Frankenstein. Meanwhile, fantasy has its beginnings in myths and legends. Technically, fantasy has been around for a long time, perhaps the oldest genre of all. Heck, back then there were no genres, just fiction. Or, well, fantasy, as the word used to mean fiction of all kinds. The root of the word also being for the Greek deity Phantasos, one of the oneros, tasked with inanimate objects in dreams and daydreams. After all, a story is a kind of daydream, isn't it? It's just written by someone else. The best books that grasp this are Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, though both are more associated with the dreams that come when you are asleep. But they are tales of the imagination, turning a child's play into an endearing story. And yet, that is not all. Stories have been told for ages, passed from generation to generation. It is one of the cornerstones of culture, a connection between the past and the present and, if allowed, well into the future. Not only that, but whatever values and virtues are considered the most important by a culture are woven within each tale, within each hero. Many of those virtues and values transcend culture, deemed necessary and good by the entire human race. These show up as commonly as such tropes as the hero fighting a monstrous villain, meeting a deity in disguise, gaining a magical item to help with the situation, and plenty more. These are just bookends, pretty wrapping paper to show how each person should be dealing with nature, dealing with the unexplained in the form of the supernatural and deities, and even how to deal with fellow humans. Details are often changed, like how many heads on a monster, or how many enemies the hero faced, but the overarching story usually stayed the same. There were groups of people dedicated to memorizing the stories and orating them to the crowd, as written text were few and far between back in those days. It could take years just to copy one book, and that's not including the fancy, sometimes funny little art pieces scattered around the text. Nowadays, as fast as we can get books out, stories tend to become less of a cultural identity and more of an individual identity. Not that this is inherently wrong, but it's not very lasting. The main reason why such classics like The Lord of the Rings have lasted so long is because they follow the storytelling traditions of cultural stories rather than individual stories. Not that individual stories can't last equally as long, but the ones that usually do end up turning into cultural stories, like those about George Washington and Honest Abe Lincoln. This is most likely the reason for the lack of quality in major stories as of late. Many are hastily thrown out individual stories that are trying to take the easy road to becoming cultural stories. But time is not on their side. Not to mention that, while they are like Jane Austen in providing commentary on society, they are not like her in that they don't show the same wit and humor when it comes to showing how ridiculous a thing may be. Austen does have her critics, like Mark Twain, but even they have to admit that she does in fact do a good job. That very well could be because there is some truth in her criticisms of societal norms of the time. Knowing what we know now, she rightly questions and ridicules them. Yet she also shows how to win at society's games, using its rules. Oh, there was a little string pulling, with her being the author and all. But in the end, her characters do win by the rules. Let's also not forget that a good story can help us to see things through the eyes of another, to learn how to empathize and or sympathize with someone else's struggles, to show that there are good times and bad times for everyone. Stories can also inspire us. The Lord of the Rings inspires hope, perseverance, and loyalty. Pride and Prejudice inspires a healthy romance and a critical eye of silly societal norms, while Adventures of Huck Finn inspires looking at others with dignity and respect. There are so many things a story can be. A preservation of culture, an inspiration during trials, a comfort, an escape, a peek into someone's soul. But more importantly, it is a conversation. A conversation with the past, a particular author, or even another culture. Sometimes the curtains are blue because of sorrow or calm. Sometimes they're just blue because the author said so. Many stories can mean many different things to different people, but one thing's for sure. We all seek truth, goodness, and beauty in each and every one. That is perhaps the largest reason why certain books have a much more lasting effect than others. There is something inherently true, good, and beautiful within each one. As such, if I liked them less, I might be able to talk about them more.
Our Controversy Corner question this issue is it okay to read stories with magic in them? Why or why not?
Non-denominational Christian, represented by Deborah Morgan. Yes, it is absolutely okay to read stories with magic in them, if not downright encouraged. The Bible itself, the greatest story ever written, has magic in it. Angels, miracles, prophecies, and a love that can bring one back from the dead. Furthermore, two of the most notable Christian fiction authors, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien of The Chronicles of Narnia and The Lord of the Rings, respectively, imbued magic into their undeniably Christian works. Many well-meaning people mistake witchcraft for magic, but this is where the discernment we've been granted comes in. God created a magical world, and attempting to avoid magic altogether in story would be to avoid God's creation itself.
Presbyterian Church Independent, represented by Joshua David Ling. Magic has largely been misconstrued as witchcraft in modern days. We live in a magical world filled with the magic of God. God created the world with unexplainable, supernatural power far beyond what any of us can think of fully or imagine. The Bible itself makes no attempt to be fully scientifically explainable to the minds of men. However, God condescends in his revelation to show us his glory through words and stories. If we're to read the Bible, which contains both magic and witchcraft, the latter being clearly condemned in practice, then we can reasonably make the case that we are permitted to read about magic in fiction. My church and greater conservative Presbyterian churches largely agree the same as myself. However, results will vary, as Presbyterians are very slow to enact conscience-binding doctrines without spelled-out scriptural prohibitions.
Roman Catholic, represented by Sarah Levesque. The Catholic Church does not have an official stance on any particular books or genre of literature. Witchcraft is, of course, a satanic practice, but fictional magic is not always witchcraft. I sort fictional magic into two categories: learnable or supernatural magic, and intrinsic or natural magic. Learnable or supernatural magic is when any character can learn words or actions to draw on power that is outside them. The power is not natural to them. Intrinsic magic is when certain characters are born with the ability to draw on a power. It is part of them or natural to them. It can get tricky, as many stories that utilize intrinsic magic have characters that must learn about their powers, like superhero stories, and some must learn words or actions to harness this power, like Aang in Avatar. For myself, I typically steer clear of anything that feels like real-world learnable magic. For my elementary classroom library, I allow intrinsic magic that doesn't need to be learned, which gives us Gandalf, Aslan, and Miss Frizzle, among others. I do not include books that have fortune tellers, seers, or soothsayers in them as good guys, for that strays too close to real-world witchcraft.
I Will Sing the Wondrous Story by Francis H. Rowley. Music by Roland H. Pritchard. I'm aware that this tune is different from what is in the visual version, but I was asked to sing this at somewhat short notice, and so I, Joshua David Ling, will do so to the tune that I know best. I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. How he left his home in glory for the cross of Calvary. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. I was lost, but Jesus found me, found the sheep
that went astray. Through his loving arms around me, drew me back into his way. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. I was bruised, but Jesus healed me. Faint was I from many a fall. Sight was gone and fears possessed me, but he freed me from them all. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. Days of darkness still come o'er me, sorrow's path I often tread, but the Savior still is with me. By his hand I'm safely led. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. He will keep me till the river rolls its waters at my feet. Then he'll bear me safely over where the loved ones I shall meet. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. Amen. Musical Musings by Ian Wilson. I Will Sing the Wondrous Story. Read by Joshua David Ling. I remember singing this hymn a number of times as a young boy in a small Baptist church we attended. I think we who were raised in a church can hear the gospel story so much that it doesn't impact how unthinkable the story really is. God Almighty, one being with the Father, came to us to rescue us from ourselves and take the punishment we deserved. Verse 1. It should strike us afresh that Jesus Christ our Lord emptied himself of the glory he had with his Father in heaven to take upon him the life of a mortal, and a common laborer at that. Christ did indeed leave his home in glory to suffer and die in our stead. We cannot save ourselves, and could not even be worthy of saving. Yet Christ gave his precious life for ours, and died the death of a rebel, a death we deserved. Verse 2. The greatest sickness is sin. Sin isn't just the evil actions we take or decisions we make that are outside of the created order. It is a congenital evil that corrupts our nature, making it impossible for us to please God. It is not simply something that we do. It is what we are. Not even we know the state of our spiritual sickness. Christ is the great healer. He comes to give us spiritual medicine to heal our souls and amend our broken natures. No one else can do this.
but Christ alone. Verse 3. Christ is the protector of all who trust in him, and all who trust him by faith are promised his lifelong friendship. And when this fading life comes to an end, he has promised us life eternal. It is indeed a